Eighth graders. So today I'm going to be reading the end of chapter 9 for core 3, and then read chapter 19 as well. So wherever we've left off in core 3, we've left off at 253. And then for core 1, you guys are on chapter 19, which is 261. So I'll write down what time to start for this one. So just to do a little recap, recently Benjamin died, obviously. Letta went with Finn and Marlowe into the woods and saw the Desecrator's little hidden house in the woods, where they had lots of like artists painting and musicians playing, and it was very colorful and just a very different world than she's used to. And then in this chapter that we are currently in for core 3, which is chapter 18, they kidnapped Smith Fearfall, the scavenger, to investigate and interrogate him about Benjamin and why he was lying about finding Benjamin. They just found out that John Noah told them to lie, and so yeah, we're on 253. I'm gonna start right at the top, and the desecrators are holding Smith Fearfall's kid too, so he's kind of freaking out. I'm just gonna start at the bottom of 252 actually, so it makes a little bit more sense. So Smith Fearfall has just said that he did find him by the river, and Letta is feeling frustrated because she knows he's lying. Finn dropped his voice a tone. Do I have to remind you that we have your son? The scavenger's face drained of color. Letta felt cold all over. They were holding the child. Top of 253 now. You wouldn't, he began, but seemed unable to finish the thought. Finn walked over to him and bent down till their eyes were level. We will do whatever we have to do. Tell me the truth, and no harm will come to your son. Desecrator, the word was barely there, and yet it pulsed with anger and hatred. Finn ignored him. Why did you lie? There was silence in the room. Letta watched Fearfall clench and unclench his hand. No one dared breathe. Finn didn't move. Finally, Fearfall spoke. John Noah, he said. Noah told you to lie? Yes. Tell me. Finn walked away from him. Fearfall dropped his head to his chest. He told me to say I found him in the forest. He said to say he was dead. That's all. Letta felt as though a fist had hit her. She remembered how she had felt when she heard that news, savaged by wild animals. He'd said that about Benjamin. Did you see the wordsmith at all? No, Fearfall answered. How did Noah know you? I'm a scavenger. I bring him things. Top of 254 now. Things? Finn stopped pacing and looked at the man. Things that are of interest to him. What was the last thing you brought to him? Fearfall looked away. Finn waited a second. Smith? He said, and this time his tone was laced with menace. Fearfall jumped as though he had been struck. I don't know, a canister. I just found it just off the beach. I thought the Green Warriors would want it. And did they? The question was asked casually, but Letta could feel the tension in the room. Yes, the scavenger said. Finn paused. He looked at Letta. In the distance, she thought she heard a child cry. The interrogation continued. Now, Smith, Finn said, you are doing very well. A few more questions, and you will be on your way home. May the goddess curse you, Fearfall said, glaring around the room. The canister, what did it look like? I'm not telling any more, Fearfall said sulkily. I've said enough. Letta wanted to scream in frustration. Why wouldn't the man just tell the truth? As though reading her mind, Marlowe put a restraining hand on her arm. What a pity, Finn said. I had hoped to avoid unpleasantness. Dean. Finn turned to the man beside him. The boy is outside. Get him. You know what to do. Letta felt as though her heart had stopped beating. Yes, sir, the other man said, and turned to leave. No! The word came out more like a groan from Fearfall. Letta saw tears in his eyes. Leave him, he said. What do you want to know? Tell me about the canister, Finn said. Fearfall shrugged. It was silver, about a stride long. Did it have markings? Fearfall shrugged again. Letters, he said. It had a string of letters written on the side of it. Now give me back my child. What were the letters? Finn pressed him. The scavenger shrugged. I don't remember, he said. Try. Finn's voice was cold. Fearfall's eyes darted around the room like those of a trapped animal. I don't remember, he said again. N, I think? N, Finn said. What else? Fearfall shook his head. We will find out one way or another. You know that. Finn said, You might as well tell us. Again, Fearfall shook his head. We're on the bottom of 256 now. Sorry, my cat came into my room, so there's a little bit of a loud door noise, but 256 now. Do you want to see your boy again? Do you? Nicene. Fearfall coughed the letters out as though they were barbed hooks. Finn hesitated. Nicene, he said. Fearfall nodded. Very well. You shall have the boy back, but you will leave here unharmed. However, next time you lie for Noah, it will not go easy for you or the boy. Remember that, Fearfall. One word to Noah and it's all over. Now let's go over your story one more time. In the distance, Letta heard a child scream. The scavenger froze. No harm will come to him, Finn said evenly. The child screamed again. No, Letta thought, her heart pounding. I can't do this. She turned and left the room, not looking back. Once she was outside the door, she could hear the child clearly, sobbing now. She followed the sound, and it led her to a narrow room farther along the corridor. She flung the door open, not knowing exactly what she expected to find. In the room, Fearfall's son, the small boy she had seen in Tin Town, was crouched on the floor, looking up at a young woman wearing a hood. We won't hurt you, the girl was saying. Please stop crying. But Letta could see the terror in the child's eyes. Bad people, he screamed. Topo 257. The words like pellets flying around the room, his voice taut and full of fear. Letta pulled off her hood. It's all right, she said, kneeling down beside him. It's all right now. Keep your hood on, the girl said urgently, but Letta ignored her. Instead, she put her arms around the child and held him close. Don't be afraid, she said to him. Don't be afraid. Your father will come soon. The child looked up at her, big brown eyes stained red from crying. Bad people, he said again, but Letta could see he was calming down. Hush, she said. All well now, all good. Just then the door opened and a hooded man stood there. Put on your hood, he said to Letta. Give me the boy. She recognized his voice. It was the one Finn had called Dean. Letta stood up. Let me take him, she said. Hood, Dean said sharply. Reluctantly, she pulled on the hood. The little boy didn't seem to mind. He clung to her hand and followed her. In the corridor, Fearfall was being watched by two more hooded figures. The boy pulled away and rushed toward him. Top of 258. Fearfall picked him up, holding him tight, kissing his head, murmuring words of comfort. Go, Finn said, appearing behind them. Marlowe was at his side. The small group moved on. As they passed Letta, the scavenger stopped, and Letta felt he was looking right at her, despite the hood. I'm sorry, she said, but desecrators, he spat the word at her. Vermin. With that, Dean pushed him on, and they all disappeared through the door. Letta pulled off her hood. She took a deep breath of fresh air. She barely noticed Finn and Marlowe coming to her side. Nicene, Finn said. Any idea what that is? Letta shook her head, finding it hard to look at him. Something from the old days? Certainly, Finn said. Gas or a chemical, most likely. And it may be nothing, but I might know someone who would know, Letta said, thinking about the old man she had met in Tin Town. He'd been a scientist in the old days, she remembered. Will you stay here tonight? Marlowe asked her. It might be safer, Finn added. Letta didn't want to stay. She felt very uncomfortable about all that had happened. She wanted space to work it out, her own space. Top of 259. That is kind of you, she said, but I think I should go home. I might be missed. Very well, Finn said. Marlowe will take you. Finn seemed exhausted now that the questioning was over. He walked past her slowly, touching her arm as he did so. Go safely, he said. So now we're on chapter 19. Sorry, just needed a drink. We're on chapter 19. This is page 261. This one is chapter 19, Scavenger. 192 is the word number, and person who collects old things or rubbish. So I'm going to read till 20. This is where core 1 should start, and core 3, you also need to read this too. All right. There was no light in Tin Town. Letta walked hesitantly, terrified she would miss her step and fall. She tried to remember her route the last day she had been here. Just going to stop really quickly to review. I forgot to do that. So they just questioned Smith Fearfall and figured out that he was lying about finding Benjamin dead. And John Noah was the reason that he lied. They let him and his son go, but it took him a while to tell about what he knew. He also told about the canister that said Nicene on it, and that was something that he gave to John Noah after finding it. And okay, so yeah, we're on chapter 19. There was no light in Tin Town. Letta walked hesitantly, terrified she would miss her step and fall. She tried to remember her route the last day she had been here. This time there were no children running about, but she could sense people in the shadows watching her. She hurried on. Was there someone following her? She strained to hear, but her own heart was beating so loudly she couldn't be certain. She stopped. A stone skidded somewhere behind her, tapping her ankle as it passed. Someone blocked her path. A man. She couldn't make out his features, but she could hear him breathing. Who you? What you want? She asked, trying to make herself sound confident. You here again? Top of 262. The voice was low, menacing. She tried to remember where she had heard it before. Who you? She said again. Go home, the man said. Don't come back, you hear? He took a step toward her. Now she could feel his breath on her face. She had to get away. Far from behind her, a hand grabbed her shoulder. Trouble? She turned. A man stood behind her, tall and broad. Well, Smith? His voice was low but firm. Smith. That is how she had known the voice. Smith Fearfall, the scavenger. Girl, no business here, Fearfall said. No business. That true? The man squeezed her shoulder. Letta looked up. She could see him now. Kirch, she said. It was the son of the old man she'd met the last time, the scientist. She could scarcely believe her good fortune. Yes, he said. Kirch. Have you business here? I come see your father, Letta said. Does that answer question, Smith? Kirch Tellen's question to Smith Fearfall was a challenge. Letta was sure of that. Girl is trouble, Fearfall said, but he turned and walked away. Come, Kirch Tellen took her hand. Follow me. Follow me. Letta followed him in and out, past huts, piled one on top of the other, through the rank smells, the misery, and the sense of hopelessness. Kirch stopped at a hut at the end of a row. Smith Fearfall not bad man, he said, turning to her. Desecrators took him and his son, boy, frightened bad. She could hear his screams still. Bad people, the terror in his eyes. Why you talk to father? Tellen's voice woke her from her stupor. I want to ask him, she stammered. Oops. I want ask him, she stammered, about something before melting. Kirch frowned. Letta pressed on, and I bring healing herbs. Kirch ducked under the low door into the hut. Letta followed. The house was not in complete darkness. A small candle glowed in one corner, enough to let Letta see the old man slumped in a chair by the far wall. My father no like dark, Kirch said by way of explanation. I try keep light here before he sleep. There was a strange smell in the room, like putrid meat. A dead animal? As Letta came closer, she realized that the smell was coming from the man's leg. The gaping wound was now covered in yellow pus, and a black clot of blue bottles hovered above it. Letta's stomach heaved. What name? She whispered. Salam, he said. His name's Salam. Top of 264. Get water, she said to Kirch, and started to unpack her bag. Only rainwater, Kirch said. Better than nothing, Letta retorted. Rainwater was so polluted that people would no more drink it than seawater, but for this, Letta thought it could do no harm. And fetch rag, Letta ordered before kneeling down in front of the old man. Salam, she said gently, I brought herbs, make you feel better. She pulled the small bottle of water from her bag and held it to his lips. He drank slowly, barely wetting his tongue before pushing the bottle away. Kirch came in and handed her a small bowl of cloudy water and a piece of gray cloth. From her bag, Letta took a tincture of calendula the healer had given Benjamin when he had cut his leg on rusty metal. She knew it had the power to kill infection, but first she had to clean the wound. She dipped the cloth in the water and started to dab at the edges of the incision. She had to stop constantly to bat away the flies, but she persisted until the edges of the cut were clean. Then, as gently as she could, she applied the tincture to the gaping cut. Despite her attempts at gentleness, the old man stifled a groan as the tincture hit the wound, but Letta soothed him, talking to him, while she continued with her work. Nearly done now, she said, patting his hand. Nearly done. She tied the rag around the infected leg, which would at least keep the flies away. Thank you, the old man said when she had finished. Girl need to ask you something, Kirch said as Letta packed her bag again. No, Letta said. You need to rest. I come another day. No, Salam said. Ask now. Letta sat back on her heels and looked up at him. Nicene, she said. Is a chemical, I think, stored in a silver canister? Nicene, the old man repeated softly. Long time ago. He was quiet for a moment, and Letta held her breath. It was to be used on criminals. It destroyed the part of the brain responsible for language. List, father, Kirch said. Talk list. Letta could feel the fear in Kirch's voice. She turned to him. Please, she said, there is no need. Kirch shrugged. The old man continued. The left temporal lobe, that is the part of the brain that understands and produces language. My father's scientist before melting, Kirch said, his voice cracking. May the goddess forgive me, the old man whispered. Letta leaned closer. It was we scientists who discovered Nicene. Hans Nicene, top of 266, was one of the foremost scholars of his day. He discovered the chemical while he was looking for a cure for dementia. Nicene is soluble in water, tasteless, odorless, colorless. It is also very efficient. Efficient for what? Letta prompted. Once ingested, Nicene destroys the left temporal lobe. After that, you can't speak, can't read or write, can't understand language. You are totally isolated from all other living things, and you can't invent a new language either. There was silence for a moment, and Letta tried to imagine the loneliness of that. It was to be used on criminals, the old man went on, only on the most heinous of criminals, those who could never be allowed back into society. The human rights groups kicked up a bit of fuss at first, but they got no support. Not when people saw the type of people Nicene was to be used on: sadistic serial killers, people who harmed children. Letta nodded, hardly daring to breathe. But of course, it didn't stop at that, the old man continued. How do you mean? The mentally ill were the first to be drawn in. The government started to use Nicene secretly on people with mental illness. It kept them quiet, easier to deal with. He stopped and Letta handed him the bottle of water again. This time he drank deeply. Then it was terrorists or anyone who disagreed with the government. They too were silenced. Nicene was 100% successful, and there was an added, unforeseen bonus. Letta waited. They died soon after the treatment. It killed them? The old man shook his head. No, he said, not exactly. Medically, it shouldn't have shortened their lives, no. Nicene himself saw it for what it was. They died of despair. Her chin dropped his chin dropped to his chest, and he studied his hands. Letta had a fleeting image of Edgeware's son hanging from a tree. The old man looked up at her. Why are you interested in Nicene? He asked. Like all science, it was lost after the melting. Thank the goddess. I had never thought to speak of it again. No reason, really, Letta lied. I'm the wordsmith, and someone mentioned it. It's my job to record all the words we can find. The old man laughed, a small, bitter sound. So you can destroy them? So we can remove them from circulation, Letta said, packing her bag, until man can once more be trusted with them. She didn't dare confide in these people. She knew nothing about them. It was dangerous enough not to have spoken Liszt. She touched the old man's hand. Thank you, she said. I hope your leg is better soon. Wait, he said. How is John Noah? You see him? Top of 268. Yes, Letta said. I see him. And the Dear sisters, they still there? Amelia Dear is there. There used to be three of them, three sisters, good-looking girls. I can't remember their names. Noah was besotted with them. Only humans he ever truly loved. There was a falling out. Amelia stayed with Noah. The old man's words were more for himself than anyone else, Letta thought. She stood up. Kirch moved back and let her pass in front of him. I'll walk with you, he said. Letta didn't argue with him, though her head was teeming with all that she had heard, and she desperately needed to be alone and figure it out. I hope you know what you are doing, Kirch said when they reached the gate. Letta looked at him. What did he know or suspect? He put his hand on her shoulder and looked into her eyes. If you ever need help, you know where to find me. Thank you, Letta said. I have to go now. Go back to your father. Take care of him. Here. She rooted in her bag until she found the tincture. Use this. It will help. He took the little bottle from her. Thank you, he said softly, but I think he is beyond our help now. Letta watched him go back toward Tin Town, and her heart ached for him. How could she have lived in this all this time on the edge of that hellhole and not have known what went on there? Top of 269. She turned and faced the gate, looming out of the darkness. And this is some time passing. Letta spent much of the night awake, going over all she had learned. Don't drink the water. That was what Benjamin had said to her, and she had thought he was delirious. She now knew what those words meant. Had Noah already put the chemical in the water? If he had, then he wouldn't drink the water, and neither would any of the chosen ones. But maybe he hadn't put the chemical into the water yet. She would have to work on that principle, she decided. Anything else was hopeless. When morning came, she felt weary but couldn't rest. Her head was still teeming with ideas, half-formed plans, and desperation. I have to get out of here, she thought. Water. I'll go get water. She grabbed her coat and headed out. The day was still young and cold. The snow had disappeared, but the air was icy and the wind blew from the north. Her feet found their own way down the little incline into the square where Werber was busy handing out water. What would he say if he knew what John Noah intended for them? Top of 270. An old man was taking his full bottle and walking away as she approached. No harm, Wordsmith, he greeted her. No harm, Letta responded. She was surprised he knew her, though already it seemed people were accepting that she was the wordsmith. Still, each time they greeted her, she had an urge to look around to see where Benjamin was. Benjamin. She felt the familiar ache as she thought his name, but she pushed it aside and walked over to Werber. He smiled when he saw her. No harm, Letta, no harm, she answered. Come for water? Yes, she smiled. Thirsty. He pulled a cup from under his table and filled it from a bottle on the ground. Drink, he said to her. She sipped from the cup gratefully. Good water, she said. Cool. He nodded. All water come from the tower? She asked, nodding toward the water tower that stood on the hill behind him. Yes, Werber said, and she could hear the pride in his voice. Water pumped into tower to be clean. Pumped, a specialist word for those involved in water. How cleaned? She said, frowning. Chemicals, top of 271. Werber said without hesitation. Chemical, another specialist word. Letta gave him what she hoped was an admiring look. You work there, Werber? She asked. A flush colored his skin. He looked around to check that no one was listening. Sometimes, he said, sometimes. He started to fill her bottle with water from the tap. You work there this week? Letta pushed him. This morning, he said proudly. You clean the water? He nodded, not allowed to talk about it. I understand, Letta said, and took the bottle from him, her mind racing. He wasn't allowed to talk about it because water in Ark equaled survival. The water tower was heavily guarded, and because Noah feared that the desecrators could take the water plant and gain control of Ark, everything to do with water was heavily secured. She remembered the basics from school. The dirty water was brought in barrels to the tower, where it was cleaned. The clean water then went into big tanks, where it was stored until it could be piped out to the water stations. That was all she knew, and she was certain it wasn't enough. She needed to know everything about the water plant. Everything. So we are up to chapter 20 now. That is the extent of your reading today. Thanks for following along and reading.